has happened in our economy with technology, and your companies represent innovation and success. But just as when the railroads were ascendant and were in charge and ripping off farmers because of practices they were able to get away with, just as when Wall Street was flying high, but there was no one regulating blue sky laws, we now have a whole new world in the economy. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I remember you testifying in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I asked you your position on the concept of a federal regulatory agency. My recollection is that you were positive about that. Is that still the case?
I think it could be a reasonable solution. There are obviously pros and cons to doing that versus through the normal, the current structure of having different regulatory agencies focused on specific issues. Right. But because a lot of the things trade off against each other, like one of the topics that we talked about today is encryption, and that's obviously really important for privacy and security.
Right.
But
can we just go down the line? I'm at the end, sure. But thank you. Mr. Giacomino.
Senator, I think the industry initiative to keep those conversations going would be something X would be very, very proactive about. If you think about our support of the REPORT Act, the SHIELD Act, the Stop CSAM Act, our support of the Project Safe Childhood Act, I think our intentions are clear to participate and to lead here.
Yeah.
Senator, we support national privacy legislation, for example, so that sounds like a good idea. We just need to understand what it means.
All right. Mr. Spiegel?
Senator, we'll continue to work with your team, and we'd certainly be open to exploring the right regulatory body for big technology.
But the idea of a regulatory body is something that you can see has merit.
Yes, Senator.
And Mr. Sifrin?
Yeah, we're very open to working with you and our peers and anybody on helping make the internet a safer place. You know, I think you mentioned this is not a one platform problem.
Right.
So we do look to collaborate with other companies and with nonprofits in the government.
Okay. I thank you all. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Well, we're going to conclude this hearing, and thank you all for coming today. You probably have your scorecard out there. You've met at least 20 members of this committee and have your own impressions of their questioning and approach and the like. But the one thing I want to make clear as chairman of this committee for the last 3 years is this was an extraordinary vote on an extraordinary issue. A year ago, we passed 5 bills unanimously in this committee. You heard all the senators. Every spot on the political spectrum was covered. Every single senator voted unanimously in favor of the 5 pieces of legislation we've discussed today. It ought to tell everyone who follows Capitol Hill and Washington a pretty stark message. We get it, and we live it. As parents and grandparents, we know what our daughters and sons and others are going through. They cannot cope. They cannot handle this issue on their own. They're counting on us as much as they're counting on the industry to do the responsible thing. And some will leave with impressions of our witnesses and the companies they represent that you're right as an American citizen. But you ought to also leave with the determination to keep the spotlight on us to do something. Not just to hold a hearing, bring out a good, strong crowd of supporters for change, but to get something done. No excuses. No excuses. We've got to bring this to a vote. What I found in my time in the House and the Senate is that's the moment of reckoning. Speeches notwithstanding, press releases and the like. The moment of reckoning is when we call a vote.
Thank you.
So I played a lot of
for the excellent content for Mr. I'd like to sub to your channel.
Rock online in my time, half of which is documented on Honkai Star Rail. Honkai Star Rail just launched their most. Topaz is a cheerful. Alright, welcome back guys, my name is D, and welcome to the channel. It's been a long time since I streamed some Ragnarok Online stuff. So, just a few days ago, I recovered my IRO account.
Autopilot
on IRO stuff, a lot of new items, quests, even new classes. One thing I ask that a lot of people like, just like leveling to 99 and then going back to level 1. Tried to attack the creamy here, thought I was strong and shit, but apparently nope. So I got to job level 10, talked to the merchant, I guess guildsman, right? and I got to high merchant. How to trying to figure out and find, but I first few levels basically. And if you guys don't know, Antel was 3 south of Frontera before, but they moved it after a few episodes. So here's me trying to be
Approaching Stargate.
trying to be strong, and
Yeah. Oh. Gotta be careful. Oh god. That kind of looks like a town. What the hell? Let's look back at the map again. So annoying. So we're on the north side of the Armenian Sea. Toxai, which is a guarded town. GK Castle. Tefra Crater. What was that sound?
Autopilot jumping.
And the Mooring Cure, which is a guarded town, and Toxai, which is a guarded town. So, I don't know where I am in this
Warping to
mess.
Stargate. Warp drive active.
Then there's Galcor, which is north, and I think I'm... I don't know. I have no idea where the fuck I am at all. I don't know which way I came through. And I don't know where I am right now. So I guess I can go over there, but I don't know if I can follow the beach. And so I don't know.
Approaching Stargate.
I don't know if I should go to the water even. But I guess I'm gonna. Go figure out what that is. See if I can live there. See if it's a town.
Autopilot jumping. Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
Oh god, is that a road? How high up am I? No, it's not a road. It's just a weird, pointless sink in the whole thing. Well, alright. I'm committed now, but if I fall too far, I'll die. I'm gonna go chill. Yep, here it is. I died. Yep. Oh, well, so maybe I can get a res somewhere that isn't... yeah, this might actually be good. Because it's like, I don't want to walk anymore. I don't care if you send me home, but maybe I can get a priest that'll actually res me. I've walked so fucking far east that I don't think I'm in the same basic, like, system. Tindremic can't stop me from resing anymore. I'm so far east. And hopefully this will bring me to, like, Toxai or one of those, like, you know, towns. I don't know.
Approaching Stargate.
Where am I now? Okay, well, will you res me? Curite allied tribes. Ooh, maybe there's different music here. Let's listen. Where am I? Oh what is this place? Curate allied tribes, huh? Well, at least I can res here. I have no idea where I am. But I think the map can help me identify it. So if we look at towns, Morinkir. I'm in Morinkir, and east is Toxai. I didn't really want to go to Morinkir, but I'll take
Autopilot
cool,
jumping.
there's guards here and stuff, and I could just like do stuff like sell wood and farm. I'm not getting any music, which is annoying. I'm gonna go louder.
Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
Wow, so due east is Toxai. Morinkir, that must be Toxai. I want to go there. I don't want to be here. I want to go over there. I've never seen Toxai, and I like this place, but it's not where I want to live. Yeah, so that's Toxai. Why are they so close to each other?
Approaching Stargate.
What was that? Are they resetting? Oh yeah, cluster shut down, and then oh, it's in 5 minutes. Damn it! I'm still 4 jumps away from Amar. It's all right. So, okay, down here there is steppe nettle, purum, there's wolves, a black bear, razorback, bush pigs, granum. There's a bandit camp down the wall south, and there's a graveyard there in Morinkir.
Warping to Stargate.
There's a treasure chest in Toxai ruins. And bush pig, allium, black bear, blackwood, bush pig. I'm looking for horses mainly. Oh no, where does one get horses here? Maybe I can just buy one.
Approaching Stargate.
Oh, there's a fishing village? Cool. There's like a fishing village right there. What do horse spawns look like? What color are they? Looking for a horse. No, I'm trying to find,
Autopilot jumping. Warping to Stargate.
Well, so before I
drive
leave
active.
where I'm at, I should actually take a look at seeing if there is a horse vendor here. And I will just purchase a horse. If there's like a horse for 4 or 5 gold, I'll just figure out some way to Yeah, I'll just figure out some way to get the funds. Yeah, there's pigs right there. I could probably punch pigs to death and sell them for enough gold to get a tool. Yep, here's a fishing vendor. Extraction for Bigula, extraction extractor. I'm glad I got out of that town. I've been in that town too long. It got kind of boring. It was the same old shit. Elite guard, elite guard. Guild supply vendor. God, there's guards everywhere.
Stargate.
Animal material librarian. Oh no, did I lose my book? I did lose my book. I lost my book. That's annoying. Or no, maybe I reached 70. I reached 70 is what it was. Grocery vendor, elite vendor. Extraction herbologium. Botany lore librarian. Grocery vendor, magic vendor, equipment vendor, utility vendor. It's good to know, but I need a little bit more than that. Wait.
Autopilot jumping.
I've got to find the equerry.
Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
Military architect, artesian architect, house vendor. Yeah, let's look at the house vendor. I haven't looked at that in a while. So yeah, what's the prices on these? So it's like for a small tier 1 deed, it's 150 gold. Almost reached that in that first town in like 2 days or something like that. It's not that hard. So it gives me a goal to work towards something, but I don't know. I don't know why you would want a house. Here's the cooking vendor. I don't really know what the benefits would be, really. Here's the equerry and the Toxai pet broker. Oh, good, they are selling horses, but they're expensive. Damn it. So for 12 gold, I can get a horse. Yeah, 12 gold, I can get a horse, and that's good. So, and that won't be that hard. I don't know what the best path to that is, but that's not real. I think it's punching pigs to death and then vendoring the stuff for a weapon, I think. There's a song I never heard before. Alright, let's punch a pig and see how we do. This gate sucks. Why is it here? It's annoying that I can't jump over that. So dumb. Oh, there we go. It's because I have my hands out. Which direction to go? West? Okay, so to get back to this town, I've got to go east. Okay, so I went due west to get out of, to leave the town. Gotta find something or something. Well, here's water. Maybe I can sell the water or something? I don't know. I like the sitars. Good. Oh, there's a big waterfall there. Wow. Pretty awesome, actually. There's all these, like, things up there. There's all these buildings up there. There's a lot of guards here for some reason. Seems pretty safe place to live, actually, and just thrive. But I'll need to get a start somehow, and I don't really know how to do that. Just looking around for some living thing that I can kill, or something that I can harvest, or something. What the hell was that sound? What the hell was that sound? What? Oh no, it's a risen wolf. Uh-oh. Here, perfect. 4 gherkins. I wonder what they'll sell for. Maybe I can get the risen wolf to aggro, and then I can get the guards to kill it. Where was he? There he is. I want to fight this thing. What? It's like he's not real. It's weird. But I got gherkins, and that's a good start. Wow. Oops.
On these
Oh, this
measures.
is over. Straight
It's time-
over. Okay. Thank you, Mark Felton Productions, for the excellent content for my stream. I'd like to sub to your channel. This is the death of Himmler.
By early 1945, with the failure of the Ardennes offensive in the west and the massive Soviet offensive in the east, time was clearly running out for Nazi Germany, a fact that was becoming obvious to many of her leaders. Hitler remained convinced that the war could still end favorably for Germany, but he was becoming an increasingly isolated and physically degenerated figure who believed his own
So on
propaganda.
the furthest west side of the town is the
that
bank.
the German army and the Waffen-SS were performing miracles and attempting to hold the western and eastern fronts, not to mention Italy as well. But with the German economy collapsing under the weight of heavy Allied bombing, and with too few well-trained soldiers and sufficient armoured vehicles, and most importantly fuel, the attrition was unsustainable. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and the police, was by 1945 unquestionably the second most powerful man in Germany after Hitler. The SS he had built up was all-powerful, controlling a 900,000-strong army, the Waffen-SS, and a huge system of concentration and labour camps in many industrial enterprises, making the SS a state within a state. Himmler had benefited greatly in the aftermath of the July 1944 bomb plot against Hitler, allowing him to extend his influence over the regular army, whose generals were now held in suspicion by the Führer, and Himmler used the roundups that followed the bomb to remove many of his remaining opponents. But Himmler had been stupidly promoted to field command by Hitler, leading first to his incompetent handling of the situation in the Vosges Mountains against US and French troops in the winter of 1944-45, and then command of Army Group Vistula to halt the Soviet offensive into Pomerania in early 1945. Himmler was eventually relieved of his command on the 20th of March, and these failures drove a wedge between Himmler and Hitler.
It's a cool town, I like
so
it.
much so that Himmler decided to take action to end the war without recourse to Hitler. His intention was to negotiate a peace settlement with the Western powers, that is the United States, Great Britain and France, allowing Germany to concentrate all her forces on stopping the Soviets, and in the process making Himmler the leader of Germany. Himmler had access to Germany's best secret intelligence organizations and information, but he chose as his peace envoy his beloved and trusted masseur, Felix Kersten, a Baltic German physical therapist, whom Himmler had come to rely upon to cure his stomach cramps caused by stress and anxiety. A society figure with a list of influential European patients, Kersten had already acted as Himmler's special envoy before. In August 1942, Kersten had helped organize Himmler's visit to Finland and was completely trusted. Himmler began peace negotiations, knowing full well that he couldn't inform Hitler of what he was doing. Hitler was firmly welded to fighting to the bitter end, and some historians have suggested that Himmler may have been seeking to eventually supplant Hitler as leader, as the Führer continued to deteriorate physically. And if any man could have toppled Hitler from within the inner circle, Himmler was probably best placed with the men and resources at his disposal. Himmler's first step was in reaching out to the Allies via neutral Sweden. Kersten was already in Stockholm and approached Count Volker Bernadotte, an aristocrat and a head of the Swedish Red Cross. Bernadotte had organized prison exchanges in 1943 and 44, whereby 11,000 Allied POWs were brought out of Germany via Sweden. He had a good working relationship with both sides. Himmler entered into a correspondence with Bernadotte, and Himmler sent his spy master, SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, to Stockholm for face-to-face meetings. Himmler realized that he had some leverage with the Nordic nations, and could possibly earn some goodwill from the Western Allies by using some of the concentration camp prisoners as pawns in this game.
This place is beautiful.
By now, Himmler was indeed playing a dangerous game. On the 20th of April 1945, he duly turned up at Hitler's last birthday celebration at the Reichschancellery in Berlin, a heavily bombed mess by this stage. The same day, Soviet spearheads reached the city's eastern suburbs and opened fire with artillery. To Hitler's face, Himmler swore complete allegiance before leaving Berlin as soon as he could going north for a meeting the following day at Kersten's country estate at Harzwalde, 70 kilometers north of the capital. The previous day, Norbert Mazur, Swedish representative of the World Jewish Congress, had been flown from Stockholm to Tempelhof Airport in Berlin. The trip arranged by Kersten. Mazur was then driven to Harzwalde to await the arrival of Himmler and Schellenberg. Himmler arrived at the estate at 2:30 a.m. on the 21st of April and had a rather bizarre 2.5-hour meeting with Mazur, an extraordinary meeting between two dread enemies. Himmler tried to justify the Holocaust to Mazur and even told him, "I want to bury the hatchet between us and the Jews. If I had had my own way, many things would have been done differently." Himmler also told Mazur, who would inform Bernadotte and the Allies, waiting and watching behind him, that he was the Nazi leader the Western Allies should be talking to. He even wanted the Allies to set aside the final solution and move on. To us today, Himmler appears completely deluded, but his utterances demonstrate both his ruthlessness and lack of empathy for the victims of his policies, and his self-belief that he was the only man capable of saving Germany at this stage in the war. As an act of what Himmler perceived as goodwill, he ordered the release of 20,000 concentration camp inmates, many of them Scandinavians, and permitted their safe transport on the so-called white buses to Sweden. On the 23rd of April, Himmler had his first face-to-face meeting with Count Bernadotte when he went to the Swedish consulate in northern Germany.
Oh,
this meeting was critical. Himmler
so more
believed
here is
that
west.
he had established his good faith by permitting the White Buses operation to go ahead. And now he told Bernadotte that Hitler, in a burning Berlin being encircled by powerful Soviet armies, would probably be dead in 2 to 3 days.
Okay, so if I want
Himmler
animals...
stated that he was basically the leader in waiting. Officially, according to the 1941 Law of Succession, drawn up following Rudolf Hesse's flight
I've
to
got to
Britain,
go
Hitler's
south.
successor was Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the corpulent, drug-addled, and by now sidelined and disgraced head of the Air Force. It appeared unlikely that someone with Himmler's power would have agreed to serve under Göring as Führer. Therefore, Himmler asked Bernadotte to contact the Allied Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and tell him that Germany was prepared, under Himmler's leadership,
to set
and with
my
Himmler's
home
SS
here.
and police keeping
Or
order,
no, I can
to
always spawn
surrender
here,
to
it's
the
fine.
Western Allies, but only the Western Allies. There could be no surrender to the Soviet Union. Bernadotte suggested that Himmler write a letter to Eisenhower setting out these proposals. Of course, Himmler was now committing his treason to paper. The problem was the Allies had agreed among themselves that no one nation could accept a German surrender or partial surrender. Germany had to surrender unconditionally to all of the Allies. So if Roosevelt and Churchill had accepted Himmler's proposal, which they never did, and accepted a ceasefire and surrender of Germany's Western armies, it would have led to an immediate crisis with Stalin, and perhaps even war between the Allies. Himmler knew from long experience that the Western Allies didn't trust Stalin and were concerned by how much Europe he would swallow up before Germany's final capitulation, but Roosevelt and Churchill remained firm on the point of unconditional German surrender. Himmler was also deluding himself if he thought that the Western Allies wanted to deal with him or allow him to become the de facto leader of Germany. The Holocaust and German occupation policies throughout Europe, much of it stemming from Himmler's SS and Gestapo, ensured that Himmler was labeled as a major criminal to be found and punished once Germany surrendered. But things were happening beyond Himmler's control. The same day that Himmler met Bernadotte in Lübeck, Hermann Göring precipitated a leadership crisis in Berlin. Göring had also left Berlin on the 20th of April, following Hitler's birthday and a military conference in the Führerbunker. He had made arrangements to have trainloads of art and antiques, much of it looted from private collections, shipped south from his huge estate, Karrenhall near Berlin, to the relative safety of Obersalzberg near Berchtesgaden in southern Bavaria, where Göring also maintained a house next to Hitler's Berghof. In Berlin, Hitler suffered a breakdown during a military situation conference in the bunker, and after calming down announced that the war was lost. Luftwaffe officers at the meeting reported to Goering that Hitler had broken and reneged all responsibility towards army and state. Goering was encouraged to send a telegram to Hitler asking him for permission to assume the leadership of the Reich. But Hitler recovered from his momentary lapse, and his sinister private secretary and minister without portfolio, Martin Bormann, intercepted the cable and spun it to Hitler as an attempt by Goering to seize power, in effect a coup. Hitler ordered Goering's arrest and stripped him of all his positions, removing him from the line of succession. However, though Goering's disgrace had cleared him out of the way of Himmler's succession, who would probably have been Hitler's natural choice under the circumstances, Himmler's overtures to Eisenhower were rebuffed. On the 26th of April, General Schellenberg was informed by Count Löwenhaupt, the Swedish legation at Lübeck, that Himmler's offer to surrender troops in Western Europe to the Allies had not been well received, specifically because Himmler was unacceptable to the Western powers as a person with whom discussions could be undertaken. Schellenberg did not inform Himmler of this development. Himmler had already dispatched a U.S. Army Air Force general the Germans had captured earlier in the war, named Vanneman, on the 24th of April to Switzerland, bearing a formal offer of German capitulation from Himmler to Eisenhower. On the 27th of April, Himmler breakfasted with Schellenberg and Count Bernadotte at Apenrode, and he expressed again his desire for some limited accord with the Allies, where he could still play a part. But Himmler's secret scheme was now leaked to the press, and the Western powers very publicly dismissed Himmler's peace offer, effectively ending his ambition to hang on to some high office after Hitler's demise. That same day, Himmler's SS liaison at the bunker, Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, went absent without leave and was discovered naked, drunk, and in the company of his mistress in his Berlin apartment, with a suitcase full of civilian clothes packed. Hitler's bodyguards bundled him back to the bunker, where Bormann pressured Hitler to have him shot. The proverbial hit the fan on the evening of the 28th of April, when BBC Radio broadcast a Reuters press report all about Himmler's secret peace negotiations, this being picked up in the bunker by a gleeful Bormann. When Hitler was presented with evidence of the Reichsführer's disloyalty, he went berserk. Himmler was declared a traitor, relieved of all his officers and ordered arrested. The hapless Fegelein was marched outside and shot. When Hitler gave these orders, Soviet troops were only 300 yards from the bunker. The following day, Hitler confirmed Goering and Himmler's expulsion from the Nazi Party and dismissal from all offices, and named his successor as Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, then headquartered at Flensburg in the north of Germany. Himmler, however, was not arrested, despite Hitler's order. He moved with Schellenberg, his adjutants, personal staff and bodyguard battalion to Kalkhorst, establishing a new SS headquarters there. Here he contemplated his next moves. Hitler killed himself on the 30th of April, and Dönitz succeeded as planned. Some of Himmler's subordinates pressed him to use his remaining men and take over Dönitz's new government. But Himmler was unsure and hesitant. He decided to use Schellenberg to continue negotiations with the Allies via Sweden and also through Grand Admiral Dönitz. Himmler wanted to be appointed a minister in the new government, and he did have some influence over Dönitz. It was Himmler who convinced Dönitz to replace Joachim von Ribbentrop as Nazi foreign minister. Von Ribbentrop, his career at an end and fearing capture, scuttled off to Hamburg and went into hiding. He was eventually apprehended by a British Army snatch squad some weeks after the city had been captured, shacked up in a grimy flat with a half-naked young woman. Himmler remained an important figure at Dönitz's new headquarters. The impression given of Himmler as a meek, confused and cowardly individual begging Dönitz for a new role and then being rebuffed is inaccurate. In fact, Dönitz actually appointed Himmler commander of all remaining German armed forces in northern Germany, Denmark and Norway. When Dönitz received Bormann's message from the Führer bunker ordering him to arrest Himmler as a traitor, Dönitz had actually been in a meeting with the Reichsführer discussing the imminent fall of Hamburg to the British. Instead of arresting him, Dönitz continued with the meeting. The following day, Himmler went to Dörnitz's headquarters and had lunch with the Grand Admiral. According to his mistress, Hedwig Potthast, Himmler hired rooms in Lübeck for her, and Himmler came to stay with her. This is in despite of the accepted history that Himmler was preparing to move south. But at some point, the pretense that Himmler would be able to obtain a position in Dörnitz's government became clear. On the 6th of May 1945, only hours before the end of the war in Europe, Dönitz informed Hitler that according to Hitler's last will and testament, a copy having now reached him, Himmler was dismissed from all offices of state forthwith. He was no longer Reichsführer SS, head of the German police, or commander-in-chief of the reserve army. He was finished. Himmler apparently was castigated by the new Nazi Minister of the Interior, Count Schwerin von Krosigk, when he told him bluntly, "You should drive straight to Montgomery's headquarters and say you are Heinrich Himmler and that you want to take full responsibility for everything the SS has done." At this point, having exhausted all possible avenues as a peacemaker and latterly as a prospective minister in the new government, Himmler was left with two viable options: surrender himself to the Allies and face trial as a major war criminal and, of course, inevitable execution, or go into hiding. He chose the latter course. When Count von Krosigk told Himmler to drive to Montgomery's headquarters and take responsibility for the crimes of his SS, Himmler apparently turned white, said nothing in reply, and left Dörnitz's headquarters, never to return. He evidently realized on the 6th of May 1945 that his power was at an end. But he didn't flee into hiding, at least not yet. Though the SS state functioned right up to the end of the war, Himmler didn't have his personal planes standing by to fly him to Sweden, Spain, Antarctica, or the moon. Rather, he moved to a requisitioned farmhouse at Zattrup. At this point, Himmler released his guard unit, which made itself scarce, and was left with a handful of trusted officers and men from his personal staff who were all in the same position as their leader. With Himmler at Zattrup were 5 principal SS officers: his personal administrative officer, Standartenführer Dr. Rudolf Brandt, his personal doctor, Gruppenführer Dr. Karl Gebhardt, SS Brigadeführer Otto Ohlendorf, a major war criminal, his personal aide, Sturmbannführer Josef Kiermeier, and his 2 adjutants, Obersturmbannführer Werner Grothmann and Sturmbannführer Heinz Macher. There were also present about 10 other SS men, 7 of whom were NCOs. This group of perhaps 16 men, including Himmler, still had 4 large field cars at its disposal and plenty of weapons. According to established histories, Himmler now determined to go to Bavaria. According to Count von Krosigk, Himmler had previously stated to him sometime in early May the following regarding the Allies: "They will never discover me. Political developments are going to be in my favor. I shall go into hiding to await them." We will deal with Himmler's movements on the run in a future video, but it certainly appears the case that Himmler still sought some future role in Germany, and his stated aim was to lie low and then re-emerge once the political situation was favorable. He didn't appear to be interested in escaping from Germany. He was close to neutral Sweden, yet gathered his loyalists to go south through the entire length of Germany under Allied military control to Bavaria, when he could still have fled with relative ease north to a neutral nation. Himmler the peacemaker was now Himmler the fugitive.
I have like
Himmler
4
remained
bill in
in
liquid
the game,
now.
and a wily and
Just
resourceful
liquid.
opponent at this
I'm the
stage.
richest I've ever been in EVE.
The Reichsführer SS was in a tricky situation. He had exhausted avenues with both the Allies, who wanted nothing to do with him, and Grand Admiral Karl Dörnitz's new Nazi government in northern Germany, who eventually dismissed him from his offices of state on the 6th of May 1945, following Hitler's earlier instructions. Himmler had drastically reduced his entourage from several hundred officers and men to only 14 faithful officers and NCOs. Since the 6th of May, Himmler and this group were staying at a farmhouse in Zattrup, and Himmler announced his intention to go south to Bavaria. The obvious question is, why? In the previous video, we saw that Himmler had plenty of opportunities to flee to neutral Sweden, but did not go. To travel south throughout Germany was extremely risky. Though the country was in an uproar with millions of displaced civilians and demobilized German soldiers wandering about, British and US troops were starting to exercise control over their territories, and Allied patrols and checkpoints were everywhere. One of their purposes was the identification and apprehension of persons of interest to the new occupiers, and Himmler was at the top of that long list. Whilst at Zattrup, Himmler and his remaining followers changed their appearances. Primarily, this meant removing all insignia from their uniforms and obtaining false documentation. All of them, including Himmler, would pretend to be recently demobilized German secret field police, Geheime Feldpolizei. Himmler himself carrying papers that identified him as Sergeant Heinrich Hitzinger, lately of a special armoured company attached to the secret field police, demobilized on the 3rd of May 1945. The collective story was that the group were ill and making their way back home, just another 15 German soldiers among millions roving the highways and byways of recently surrendered Germany. Himmler also altered his physical appearance, as he was the most recognizable among the group due to the many hours of wartime newsreel appearances, thousands of photographs and public speeches. He shaved off his moustache and wore a black eye patch over his left eye. The choice of a secret field police unit was, on the surface, actually quite a good one. Such units were often staffed by middle-aged soldiers, many unfit due to war wounds or illnesses. Himmler was 44 years old at the time, and several others in the group were also middle-aged. Any Allied troops should have dismissed such a shambolic group as unimportant after a cursory glance at their papers. But the group had made a mistake. They didn't know that members of the secret field police were subject to immediate arrest by the Allies, including NCOs. This was because the secret field police was part of the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, the SS security police. Himmler's cover name, Heinrich Hitzinger, was not made up. Hitzinger was a real person, a rural policeman tried and sentenced to death for defeatism some months before. His papers had been in the possession of the Gestapo and appropriated for Himmler's use, as Hitzinger apparently bore a strong resemblance to the Reichsfuhrer. All this suggests that Himmler had been making preparations for just such an eventuality for some weeks or months. Himmler made his move south on the 10th of May 1945, 2 days after the German surrender. The 15 men, undoubtedly well armed with pistols and machine guns, used 4 large Wanderer W11 field cars, much favoured by Himmler during his earlier visits to the front. The next day, the group arrived in the small village of Delver, a few miles southeast of Friedrichstadt on the Eider River. The next day, the convoy arrived at Marna. It had taken, due to the confusion on the roads caused by refugees, German troops and destroyed vehicles, 2 days to travel a mere 60 miles south. They were now stuck on the north bank of the Elbe River estuary, with no way to move the cars over. Instead, the 4 big field cars were abandoned, and the group walked down to the riverbank at Brunsbüttel. After some searching and negotiations, Himmler's party paid a fisherman 500 Reichsmarks to ferry them across the river to the town of Neuhaus, the mouth of the Oster River. From now on, Himmler's party would be on foot. Whatever plan the Reichsfuhrer or any other member of the party had is not known, but they continued south. For another 5 days, Himmler's party trudged along country lanes, sleeping in farms, barns, or even beside the road, becoming increasingly dirty and dishevelled, footsore and exhausted. By the 18th of May, the group reached Bremerwörde, a small town on the river Oster. The plan was to walk through the open countryside to avoid getting tangled up in the towns and villages between Hamburg and Bremerhaven, which were both under full British occupation. On the 18th of May,
Totally
the group
empty.
moved into a farmhaus on Waldstrasse in
Totally
Bremerwörde,
pointless. They could
the
have filled
owners
it with
having no
mobs
idea
and
at
made
the
it
time
so
of
good.
the identification of the men.
But nope.
SS Sturmbannführer Kiermaier, Himmler's personal aide, went forward to investigate the Oster River Bridge, which was guarded by British troops. For 2 days, Kiermaier tried to obtain special movement passes from the local mayor, the Landrat, who had been appointed to a new administration under British authority. He wanted chits of paper allowing the group to pass through the checkpoint for some manufactured reason, such as a group of sick German troops returning home to Munich. But the Landrat, probably realizing that Kiermaier represented some group of Nazi fugitives, and probably not keen on antagonizing his new masters, refused all entreaties. Himmler's group hung around at the farmhouse from the 18th to the 21st of May, before a decision was taken to try and get past the checkpoint and continue their journey. Himmler and his two adjutants, Grothmann and Macher, would hold back while the rest of the group attempted to cross the bridge. At 3 p.m., Kiermaier and Himmler's personal doctor, Gebhardt, went to the bridge, apparently not realizing that there was an unguarded ford some distance down the river where everyone could have crossed without any problems. Kiermaier and Gebhardt intended to cross the bridge, and if there were no problems, come back and fetch the others. At 4 p.m., the two Germans were stopped on the bridge by Sergeant Ken Baysbrown of 1003 Field Security Reserve Detachment, the British Army's Intelligence Corps. He examined the men's demobilization passes and knew immediately that, as secret field police, they must be arrested. But keeping this to himself, Baysbrown quickly learned from Dr. Gebhardt that he was but the vanguard of a much larger group of sick ex-secret field police. Baysbrown quickly organized 2 army trucks and an escort to bring in the rest of Gebhardt's comrades. Baysbrown, using Loser's Mill on the river as an office, informed his commander, Staff Sergeant John Hogg, that a party of secret field police was shortly to arrive. The trucks duly returned with Gebhardt and the rest of the group, but minus 3 men, these being Himmler and his adjutants. Another NCO, Sergeant Arthur Britton, who was actually Dutch-born, examined the Germans' documents. They all bore secret field police stamps dated the 1st or 3rd of May 1945, with smudged SD stamps. Some of the Germans now denied being members of the group. The youngest German was taken into the mill and interrogated by Britton and Baysbrown. He quickly confessed that the secret field police stamp was from SD headquarters, and they all belonged in one group. At 6 p.m., everyone was arrested, and trucks drove them to the civilian internment camp at Westertimke near Zeven. However, Sergeant Hogg retained Dr. Gebhardt, and together they drove to the farm to collect the 3 remaining men. But on arrival, Himmler and his cohorts had made themselves scarce. British intelligence was alerted to 3 secret field police suspects on the run in the area. Himmler's little group assumed that Kiermaier and Gebhardt's group had successfully crossed the bridge checkpoint. They waited and then tried themselves on the 22nd of May. The trio walked through the streets of Bremerwerder. Grothmann and Macher wore long SS officers' raincoats minus insignia and walked either side of the much shorter Himmler, who wore bits of German army uniform, a blue raincoat and an eye patch. Before they reached the bridge, a British patrol stopped them and escorted them to the mill for questioning. Sergeant Britton received them and reported their arrival by phone to Staff Sergeant Hogg. Heinrich Himmler was now in Allied hands, but for the time being his real identity was not known to them. He was just another low-ranking German soldier to be processed into a holding camp because of his unit's World War II role. Himmler spent his first night in British captivity with Grothmann and Macher, sleeping on the floor of the mill, using grain sacks as mattresses. The important point was that if Himmler's false identity continued to hold up, he could expect to be released after a few weeks or months, perhaps earlier, enabling him to continue with his plan, as he had told Dönitz's foreign minister Count Schwerin von Krosigk in early May 1945, during which he said that the Allies would never find him, that he would lie low and await political developments. When questioned, Himmler and his companions all claimed to be sergeants in the secret field police, but the smudged SD stamps on their papers were suspicious. When the British examined Himmler's baggage, they confiscated a large magnifying glass embossed with Nazi eagle wings, but apparently thought little of it. The rest of Himmler's personal items, some of them inscribed with his monogram HH, or even his title RFSS, had been hidden at the farm and would be found much later by Intelligence Corps NCOs. At 7 a.m. on the 23rd of May, Himmler and his companions were driven to Westertimke camp via Zeven, headquarters, the 45th Field Security Station of the British Army, arriving around 9 a.m. After processing,
Approaching
Himmler and his
Stargate.
adjutants were next driven 45 miles southeast to Kolkhagen, a special interrogation camp near the village of Barnstedt, arriving after several stops around 6:30 p.m. Himmler was immediately recognized by some of the prisoners standing by the wire watching new arrivals, despite his shaved-off moustache and black eye patch, particularly by prisoner Karl Kaufmann, the former Gauleiter of Hamburg who had met Himmler on multiple occasions. Kaufmann said that Himmler didn't recognize him, or at least pretended not to do so, and shortly afterwards removed his eye patch. Before long, most of the prisoners knew that Himmler was in residence. It appears that Himmler now knew that the game was up. Sooner or later, the British would be informed by a prisoner regarding his identity. But Himmler still had some aces up his sleeve. He was, after all, the most senior Nazi in Allied captivity, and privy to a vast amount of secret
Autopilot
information
jumping.
that he might use in his favour, including information embarrassing to the British. Perhaps, thought Himmler, he might yet be able to make a deal of some kind. In any case, he could expect months or even years
Moving
of
to
questioning by
Stargate.
Allied intelligence
Drive
and war crimes
active.
investigators before he would ever be brought to trial. And what he knew of hidden treasures, secret bank accounts, even more secret deals, and of Soviet intelligence operations, plus the vast SS spy networks which still existed, was surely of immense value to his captors, who were at that moment combing Germany for men useful to them in the new Cold War that was in its opening stages. With self-preservation in mind, Himmler now demanded to see the camp commandant, Captain Thomas Sylvester, and after some argument with British NCOs, he was duly granted an interview at 7 p.m. Himmler led the trio into Sylvester's office. The British officer described Himmler as small, ill-looking and shabbily dressed. His companions looked different, evidently military men, by their tall, erect bearing
Approaching
and severe
Stargate.
haircuts. Sylvester ordered Grothmann and Macker removed from his office and kept under close guard. Himmler now put on a pair of glasses. Sylvester asked him his name, to which the prisoner replied quietly, Herr Heinrich Himmler. Sylvester immediately phoned British Second Army headquarters at Lüneburg, speaking to Major Rice, an intelligence officer who initially didn't believe him. However, after a slightly muddled conversation, Major Rice announced that he was starting out for Kolkhagen immediately. While Sylvester waited for help, he ordered Himmler to strip, and NCOs carefully examined his clothing. A brass capsule container was found containing a glass ampule, evidently a cyanide capsule.
Yeah.
Sylvester asked Himmler what it was. He replied, "That is my medicine.
ecstasy.
It cures stomach cramp." A second brass container was found. This one was empty. Sylvester
Autopilot
ordered a
jumping.
full body search, but did not search Himmler's mouth, fearful that Himmler had the glass ampule of cyanide in his mouth ready to kill himself with. Here things become a bit bizarre. Himmler dressed, and
Moving to
Sylvester
Stargate.
ordered tea and
Warp
thick
drive
British Army
active.
sandwiches, and Himmler tucked into both. If, as was later claimed, Himmler had concealed a glass ampule of cyanide in his mouth, measuring 35 by 9 millimeters, how could he have eaten thick sandwiches and drunken tea? Clearly, nothing was in his mouth at the time, and the missing ampule was not on his person or in his clothing, which had been thoroughly searched. Either that, or the afternoon tea scenario was invented by Sylvester for some reason. It appears, though Sylvester later denied it, that Himmler was allowed to shave and freshen up due to the growth of stubble reported on his corpse a short time later, expressly against regulations concerning war crime suspects. Major Rice and his team of intelligence officers arrived at Kolkhagen about
Approaching
7:30 p.m.
Stargate.
Rice carried with him a photograph of Himmler in his black Allgemeine SS uniform, plus a short biography that included both his date of birth, his Nazi and SS membership numbers, and a copy of his signature. However, Rice didn't have any details of Himmler's weight, height, or any other personal information like this, or a set of fingerprints. Rice's task was simple: establish Himmler's identity beyond a reasonable doubt. Himmler gave a vague answer when asked for his NSDAP membership number, and an equally imprecise though reasonably accurate SS number. he gave his correct date of birth. Asked to provide a signature, Himmler agreed on the strange condition that it be destroyed immediately
Autopilot
afterwards.
jumping.
The signature matched the specimen Rice had brought with him, and Himmler was formally identified as the Reichsfuhrer SS. Himmler was very chatty and mentioned a letter he had written to Field Marshal Sir Bernard Montgomery
to
on the
Stargate.
8th of May,
Warp
and even
drive
told Rice
active.
that his intention had been to lie low for a few weeks until things in Germany had calmed down, and as he said, circumstances were more favourable for an interview. He told Rice that the Soviet Union was the greater enemy, predicting war between the Allies very soon. Overall, Himmler tried to cultivate a cooperative demeanour with his captors, the exact opposite, in fact, of a man preparing to commit suicide. Rice telephoned Lüneburg and spoke with his boss, Colonel Michael Murphy, Chief of Intelligence, British Second Army. Murphy now set out to take charge of Himmler, the prize prisoner. Murphy was at the time rather out of sorts, suffering the effects of a string of victory parties. He got a lift to Kolkhagen in the car of Colonel M.A.C. Osborne, GSO-1, General Staff Officer 1, Military Intelligence Operations, 2nd Army. They arrived at the camp at 9:45 p.m. Rice and Murphy conferred. Then Murphy ordered Himmler to strip for a second time, which he refused to do. Murphy threatened him with being forcibly stripped, and Himmler reluctantly complied. Afterwards, Himmler refused to don British battle dress and wore only a grey German army shirt, his underpants and socks, his original uniform being retained by the British. An army blanket was handed to him in lieu of a coat. Murphy was, according to his later statements, concerned about the missing cyanide ampule. He decided to have a doctor conduct a body cavity search, not at the camp, but at a requisitioned house in Lüneburg, ominously called the House for Special Purposes, located at 31A Ulsenerstrasse. The doctor was to meet them at the house. This again is rather strange.
Autopilot
Why didn't
jumping.
Murphy order the camp doctor to simply conduct the body cavity search? Allowing Himmler to go for a nice drive in a car, of course, would give him the opportunity once again to kill himself. At 10:40 p.m.,
Warping
Himmler
to
got
Stargate.
into a car,
Warp
sitting
drive
in the back
active.
between Murphy's second-in-command and a guard, Murphy in the front passenger seat. Himmler even offered driving directions when Murphy became lost on the way to Lüneburg. It would prove to be Himmler's last journey, as we shall see in the next episode when we examine what exactly occurred at 31A Ulsenerstrasse that resulted in the Reichsfuhrer's death. Arriving at 31A Ulsenerstrasse, Murphy and Himmler were met by Captain Clement Wells of the Royal Army Medical Corps, a 55-year-old officer and in civilian life a general practitioner. He was considerably older than Colonel Murphy, who of course outranked him. The other person to meet them was Company Sergeant Major Edwin Austin of the Headquarters Defence Company. Murphy ordered
Approaching
Wells to
Stargate.
examine Himmler for poison, to which the annoyed Dr. Wells replied, "I am a doctor, not a detective." Murphy, a young, rather arrogant man, snapped back at him, "You will do as you are told." With this strain between the Allied officers involved, the examination now went ahead. Himmler was not the first senior Nazi to have passed through the hands of the staff at 31A Ulsenerstrasse. SS Obergruppenführer Hans Adolf Putzmann, higher SS and police leader for Russia, North and Ukraine, had been appointed by Himmler to set up the Wehrwolf, stay-behind Nazi partisan forces in Germany. Captured on the 21st of May 1945, the 43-year-old Putzmann had committed suicide inside number 31A. He had apparently swallowed poison, despite being searched thoroughly several
Autopilot
times.
jumping.
Colonel Murphy was apparently keen that such an event would never occur again on his watch, or so he later said. Bear in mind that by the time Himmler entered the front parlour of 31A
Warping to
Ulsenerstrasse,
Stargate.
Lüneburg, on
Warp
the
drive
23rd of May
active.
1945, 2 days after General Putzmann had died in the same room, he had been subjected to 2 thorough strip searches. His mouth had certainly not been searched, but he had been fed both hot tea and British Army doorstep sandwiches at Kolkhagen camp. somehow managing to chew and swallow despite the later contention that he was concealing a glass cyanide capsule in his mouth that measured 35 by 9 millimeters. This seems very unlikely. The Army's subsequent report on Himmler's death is riddled with inconsistencies due to witness testimonies that conflict to the official line. And frankly, it suggests a sanitized version of the truth was offered to either protect Colonel Murphy's reputation and that of his men who bungled the search, or for some more nefarious reason. The front parlour, unlike the official report and illustrations from the period, was unfurnished and freezing cold, the windows standing wide open. Himmler, according to the report, stripped for the third time. Murphy left the room, probably to use the lavatory, as he was still hungover. The only other person in the room, apart from Dr. Wells, was Company Sergeant Major Austin. In his search for poison, Wells decided to examine Himmler's mouth first and not to examine his rectum, the only other hiding place. Wells examined Himmler all over, lulling him into a false sense of security, then asked him to open his mouth. This Himmler did. Wells then claimed to see the tip of a small object sticking up between the left cheek and teeth. At this point, Himmler bit down hard on the object and Wells' fingers, crushing a glass ampule of cyanide.
Autopilot
His
jumping.
face constricted with pain and went bright red, his veins standing out, eyes going glassy, and he collapsed to the floor. Wells shouted, "My God, it's in his mouth! He's done it on me!" The latter doesn't sound, according to one historian, to be the utterances of a well-educated middle-class country doctor. Several other people rushed into the room as Wells tried to mop out Himmler's mouth with a wet handkerchief and also tried to give him artificial respiration. At one point, Himmler was jerked up by the ankles in an attempt to make the poison run out. Himmler breathed heavily for 30 seconds and his pulse continued for another minute longer. Then he died. So ended Heinrich Himmler. The question is, why would Himmler have committed suicide at the point alleged by the official British report on the affair? This was the third physical search he had been given that evening, and he had been treated well, given food and drink, offered fresh clothing, and not abused in any way. It should be remembered that Himmler had voluntarily revealed his identity to the Allies, which seemed strange if he was planning to commit suicide. He had had plenty of opportunities to kill himself before his arrival at 31A Ulsenerstrasse, when he was first arrested on the bridge, the night he spent in the mill sleeping on grain sacks, when he arrived at Kolkhagen camp, during his interview with Major Sylvester, in the car ride to Lüneburg with Colonel Murphy. It doesn't make sense. It has been suggested that the man who died in the parlour at Ulsenerstrasse was a double, but I find it hard to believe that all of Himmler's closest staff would have voluntarily accompanied a double into British captivity instead of escaping with their boss, especially as two of them, General Otto Ohlendorf and Dr. Gebhard, were wanted war criminals who would in due course be tried and hanged for their crimes. Various theories are currently abroad concerning what precisely happened to Himmler in that house in Lüneburg, given that he was the most high-profile Nazi prisoner that the British had captured, Hermann Göring having surrendered himself to the Americans. Theory 1 is that Himmler committed suicide, as the official report states, by use of a concealed cyanide capsule in his mouth during Dr. Wells' medical examination. Theory 2 is that the man who committed suicide was not Himmler, but a double, and I've stated the reasons why I think this theory doesn't hold water. Theory 3. Himmler was forcibly given a cyanide capsule during the course of the examination in order that the British could claim that he had committed suicide. Why? Perhaps to protect certain important British politicians, perhaps also including Prime Minister Churchill from public humiliation if Himmler was allowed to publicly testify at the Nuremberg trials, as he was privy as head of various police and intelligence services to secret negotiations allegedly made between the British and German governments in 1940 to 41 to end the war, and also many other very embarrassing things involving British and even American intelligence services and the Nazis. What truth there is in any of this is very hard to sort out, due to certain archival sources still being classified or inaccessible to historians. Himmler certainly knew everyone's dirty secrets, as he had spent years accumulating information through his spy networks, and also his control over the Abwehr, German military intelligence, following the removal of spy master Admiral Wilhelm Canaris following the July plot. It cannot be discounted as a theory for several reasons, the primary one being the refusal of the British government to release all of its files on Himmler's capture and demise until 2045, 100 years after his death, indicating intelligence interest in the entire case and something that needed to be covered up. Theory number 4 is a newish one, but not beyond the realms of possibility either. Several researchers suggest that Company Sergeant Major Austin beat Himmler to death, and the suicide story was concocted to cover up this event. Austin would only have done such a thing if ordered to do so. I managed to obtain a full copy of Himmler's post-mortem examination report, and in it the pathologist notes some abrasions on his heels. Himmler's nose was slightly bent to the right, and some facial asymmetry was noted on the corpse that was not seen in the photos of a live Himmler, but no injuries consistent with being beaten to death. I'm inclined to dismiss this last theory, as such a messy execution method would make it very difficult to make it look like suicide by cyanide. And just in case you are wondering, according to the report, Himmler was 5 feet 8.5 inches tall, had thin brown hair with a bald patch 3 by 2¼ inches on the crown, had most of his own teeth in excellent condition and grey eyes. He had a hairy chest, was slightly overweight, and had a weak chin.
Stargate.
23rd of May 1945. The Reichsfuhrer SS was dead at the age of 44, lying on the floor of the front parlour of 31A Ulsenerstrasse, Lüneburg, Germany. But that was by no means the end of the story regarding Heinrich Himmler. In many ways it was just the beginning. Some sort of investigation would have to follow to establish, officially at least, what had occurred that led to Himmler's death. At the time of his demise, Himmler was in the custody of Colonel Michael Murphy, Chief of Intelligence, British Second Army. But witnesses corroborate that Murphy most likely had left the room before Himmler's death to run to the lavatory, as he was hungover with an upset stomach. The only persons in the room before Himmler died, officially at least, were medical doctor Clement Wells and Company Sergeant Major Edwin Austin of the Headquarters Defence Company. However, during the commotion that followed Himmler's allegedly biting down on a cyanide capsule when Dr. Wells examined his mouth, other intelligence officers at the house rushed into the room, notably Major Norman Whitaker, helping with efforts to flush the poison out of Himmler. One of Whitaker's friends was visiting him when the drama occurred. Captain Norman Rimmer, shortly after Himmler's death, went to the Padres mess and on his own initiative asked the army priests who were involved in a game of whiskey bridge at the time if Himmler would be given a decent Christian burial. Among the officers playing cards was Brigadier Hugh Glynn Hughes, senior medical officer for the British Second Army. The impatient and testy Glynn Hughes telephoned Colonel Murphy and asked him to send a doctor who could satisfy Himmler's cause of death. He also told Murphy that, in due course, a post-mortem examination would be conducted, the report to act as an identification document. In the meantime, Himmler's corpse remained on the parlour floor, naked, covered by a single army blanket, and would remain under guard all night. The next morning, 24th of May, a group of army padres arrived at 9:30 to view the body, followed by a group of British female soldiers of the Auxiliary Territorial Service. The guards entertained them by lifting the blanket and showing them Himmler's genitals, to much ribald commentary and laughter. But higher up the chain of command, nobody was laughing. The other Allied nations would be extremely dismayed when they found out that the prize prisoner Himmler had died in British captivity. Some damage control was necessary, and with this in mind, the still hungover Colonel Murphy called a conference at 1:30 p.m. to decide on the party line. Dr. Wells was summoned to appear before the committee, and Murphy warned him in no uncertain terms not to discuss what had occurred in the front parlour with anyone. Also present with Murphy was his second-in-command, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Hewitt, and another intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stapleton, and 2 officers whose
Autopilot
identities have
jumping.
never been revealed, but I should hazard a guess were from MI6. The Murphy Committee decided to curtail exposure and get Himmler's body buried as quickly as possible. However, at 1:40
Walk
p.m.,
into station.
Murphy excused himself from the
drive
meeting,
active.
apparently too unwell to continue. Left in charge of the body was Intelligence Officer Major Norman Whitaker and Company Sergeant Major Austin. It was decided to photograph the corpse in situ, and 3 men were involved in this. Sergeant Carl Sutton of the Army Photography Unit, and Sergeant McCandle and Ken Gordon of Pathé News, who will shoot some film of the scene, the room now having been refurnished to make it appear more homely instead of an interrogation centre. Just as filming finished at 2 p.m, a US liaison officer arrived to view the corpse. He was followed at 4 p.m. by 3 Soviet liaison officers. Captain Kuchin demanded
Approaching
to speak to
station.
Colonel Murphy, who remained conveniently unavailable due to his surprisingly long-lasting hangover, frustrating Soviet attempts to find out what had happened to Himmler in British custody. Instead, Major Whitaker showed the Soviets the corpse. The Soviets did not agree that the body was Himmler's. Instead, on arriving back at Flensburg, Captain Kuchin cabled Berlin, asking that senior
Docking
Soviet
request
intelligence
accepted.
officer Colonel Vasily Gorbushin come to Lüneburg at once. The circus
Autopilot
continued into the
disabled.
evening. The
Waypoint
famous
reached.
Australian war correspondent Chester Wilmot and 3 other reporters viewing the corpse. Wilmot's broadcast of Himmler's death was aired by BBC Radio at 8 p.m, before any medical examination had been made or the corpse properly identified. Himmler spent another night lying on the front parlour floor, during which time 2 soldiers broke into the room, propped up his corpse and photographed him again. At 9:30 on the morning of the 25th of May, Brigadier Glyn Hughes phoned Colonel Brown of the Royal Army Dental Corps and asked him to come over and take medical and dental records to aid identification of the corpse. Brown quickly collected his equipment, rubber and plaster of Paris, and drove to Ulsenerstrasse with his assistant, Major George Atkins. Waiting for them at the house was Army pathologist Captain M.C. Bond of the 74th British General Hospital, Lüneburg. Dr. Bond commenced his post-mortem examination of Himmler at 11 a.m. Present also were Major Atkins and Colonel Brown, mortuary attendant Private White, and laboratory assistant Sergeant Glynn. The examination was not made under ideal conditions, being performed on the floor under the natural light coming in through the bay windows. The report, as I noted in the previous episode, was nonetheless exceptionally thorough. The army dentist examined Himmler's teeth.
Cool,
Though
it's
their
a really
report,
good
seen
graveyard.
here,
It's really
does not note
big.
any fragments of glass in the mouth that would have been present if Himmler had bitten down on a glass ampule of cyanide. This is a strange omission, and perhaps is evidence that the cyanide story wasn't yet quite right, or at least worked out by the intelligence officers. Brown and Atkins then made 2 latex death masks of Himmler. One would be sent to General Eisenhower's headquarters, and the other one was retained by Brown, Colonel Murphy probably not realizing that Brown had done this. This mask was later donated to the Army Medical Services Museum by Brown, providing some interesting evidence concerning the state of Himmler's face at the time of his death, in comparison to film and photographs of him alive. Many have suggested that the mask face shows signs of damage inconsistent with the official report of cyanide poisoning. Finally, we have evidence of a procedure being conducted on the corpse. One of the guards outside the door, Corporal Bill Carrot, was called in to assist. At this point, Dr. Bond removed Himmler's brain. This fact was reported widely in 1945.
God.
I've discovered references to this removal in several contemporary newspapers and
Himmler's
magazines.
brain.
The 26th of May 1945 edition of the Daily News of Perth, Australia, took this story off the wire in an article titled Himmler Buried. Quote, before the burial, doctors and detectives took fingerprints, examined the nails and teeth, and measured each limb. They also took the death mask and a cast of his ears. The brain and part of his skeleton were removed. The following day's edition of the 2nd Army Troops News Journal an army newspaper for soldiers serving in Germany, ran a story titled "Unmarked Grave for Himmler," in which it was stated, quote, "British Army surgeons took casts of his features and removed the brain and parts of the skull," end quote. Time magazine also asserted that the brain was removed, noting in an article on the 4th of June 1945, quote, "Medical authorities removed the brain, took plaster casts of the skull," end quote. Thereafter, the story of the removal of Himmler's brain went incredibly quiet for 40 years, until the Mirror, a famous British newspaper, ran a series of articles on the 6th of May 1985, close to the anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe. In a side article entitled "Riddle of the Lost Brain," they reported, quote, "Bill Carrot helped the pathologist who carried out the post-mortem examination. He said, 'I was told to hold Himmler's head. The doctor cut the top with a knife and I looked away. Afterwards, the doctor put Himmler's brain in a container which held a solution,' end quote. The Mirror reported that, quote, "The brain was sent to London for examination by scientists so they could discover the source of his evil. But since then, its location has remained a mystery," end quote. The removal of the brains of World War II leaders for study was not limited to Himmler's. Following Italian dictator Benito Mussolini's execution, probably by Italian partisans, and the public display and abuse of his corpse in Milan, the US Army had it removed to a local mortuary for a post-mortem examination. Mussolini's brain was removed and sent to the US for study, doctors hoping to find the root cause of the Duce's behavior, as they suspected he suffered from syphilis. In the event, they didn't discover syphilis, but the brain subsequently disappeared. Only in 1966 was most of the brain returned to Mussolini's widow, but some slices were retained by the US government. Incredibly, parts of Mussolini's brain and some blood samples ended up for sale on eBay in the 2000s, priced at €15,000. They were quietly removed from sale following an outcry from Mussolini's granddaughter. Another Axis leader whose brain was removed post-mortem was German Labour Front leader Robert Lai. Lai, on trial at Nuremberg, managed to hang himself in his cell on the 25th of October 1945. It was supposed that Lai was mentally ill. The brain was removed and saved. This only came to light in 2007, when glass photographic transparencies of Lai's brain were found among the effects of Nuremberg trial psychiatrist Dr. Douglas Kelly, who himself had committed suicide a decade or so after the war. Returning to the problem of Himmler's corpse, Colonel Murphy decided to get rid of it, and quickly. In the early hours of the 26th of May 1945, after Himmler's third night on the front parlour floor, a British Army truck from the Headquarters Defence Company backed up to the rear of 31A Ulsenerstrasse. Himmler's body had been prepared for burial by Major Whittaker and Company Sergeant Major Austin and his men. It had been wrapped in a length of camouflage material bound with wire. Loaded aboard the truck, which was driven by Sergeant Weston, the body was escorted in the back by Sergeant Ken Ottery. The truck was followed by Major Whittaker driving a jeep, with Austin in the passenger seat. After driving around for hours, Whittaker settled on a burial site on Lüneburg Heath. Weston and Ottery dug a grave. Himmler's body was unceremoniously thrown in and then covered over, the site disguised with branches and leaves, and Whittaker noted its coordinates on a map. The party then drove back to Lüneburg and Whittaker reported to Murphy. Though the Allies were upset by not being able to identify the body themselves, any questions regarding the manner of Himmler's death were now conveniently and neatly curtailed by the hasty burial of the biggest piece of evidence, his corpse. Later, on the 26th of May, Murphy once again decided not to meet with a delegation of Soviet officers led by Colonel Gorbushin. The Soviets demanded, however, that Himmler be exhumed, a request that was ignored. It is interesting to know that Gorbushin carried with him a set of Himmler's actual dental records captured in Berlin, which could have been used to positively identify the body. Even more incredibly, Gorbushin was denied a copy of Colonel Brown's dental chart, seen here, hand-drawn by him and Major Atkins during the post-mortem. We have to ask the question, why? Colonel Brown also asserted that Himmler's fingerprints were not taken, at variance with the established story. Next to arrive were two Americans at 3 p.m. They told Murphy that they were holding Himmler's brother Gebhard and his mistress Hedwig Potthast, who could be brought to identify the body. Less than impressed to learn that the body had already been buried, Colonel Murphy was forced to talk to them. A blazing row followed, though the British managed to resist exhuming the corpse, at least for now. Everything went quiet until early 1946. By that time, most of the players from the events of the 23rd of May 1945 at Ulsenerstrasse had moved on to jobs in civilian life. But quite out of the blue, several were suddenly contacted by the War Office in London and told to be prepared to appear before a board of inquiry to be held in Germany, including Dr. Wells, who had been examining Himmler's mouth when he allegedly bit down on the cyanide capsule, and Major Whittaker, who had buried the body on Lüneburg Heath. It appears that some doubt had crept into the identification of Heinrich Himmler in May 1945, doubts that led to the decision to exhume Himmler's corpse and conduct a second examination. The man chosen to conduct this examination was the highly experienced Dr. Ian Morris of Unit No. 2 War Crimes Commission, then collating evidence of Nazi atrocities in the British occupation zone of Germany. Himmler's corpse was exhumed a second time after being relocated by Major Whittaker and taken by truck to the morgue of the British Military Hospital in Hanover. Apart from Dr. Morris, two unidentified British civilians were present, along with Corporal D.W. Williams of the Royal Army Medical Corps. Morris reported that the corpse was in reasonable condition, its skin slimy and swollen. Incredibly, Morris was not given Dr. Bond's original post-mortem report, nor Colonel Brown's dental report. He instead had some German X-rays of Himmler's teeth. But incredibly, most of Himmler's teeth were missing. As Colonel Brown's diagram shows, Himmler had all of his teeth when examined on the 25th of May 1945, but at some time between then and his burial, most of them had been pulled out. Was this deliberate destruction of dental evidence to prevent identification of the body, particularly as the Soviets turned up with Himmler's actual dental chart for comparison? Dr. Morris could not really come to any conclusions regarding the identity of the body due to its state of preservation and missing teeth, meaning that the identification of the man who died in the front parlour at 31A Ulsenerstrasse remains contentious today. So what about the missing brain? I've spent the best part of a year trying to locate it, and I believe it still exists. Frustratingly, Dr. Bond did not leave any records concerning where the brain was sent. By deductive reasoning, we can assume that such a significant object was sent to one of the world's leading neuropathologists in London for study. The files on Himmler held at the Museum of Military Medicine only cover the post-mortem examination and the dental chart created by Colonel Brown, as well as the aforementioned press cuttings concerning the removal of Himmler's brain. However, a little research reveals that the preeminent brain study centre in Britain in 1945
There's one to do
was
soldier.
the Institute of Neurology in London, now subsumed into University College London. From this lead, research shows that the leading neuropathologist in the post-war period was Professor John Corsellis, who maintained a brain bank, a collection of specimen brains at Runwell Hospital. A UCL archivist highlighted that after Corsellis' death, the brain bank was kept going until the Runwell Hospital was closed in the 1990s. The famous brain bank and all of its specimens were sold to Synapse, the Scientific Initiative for Neuropsychiatric and Psychopharmacological Studies in Belgium. This collection is currently housed at the Duffel Psychiatric Hospital in Belgium. I recently received a reply from my inquiry saying that a thorough search of their records reveals nothing regarding Himmler. Another name given to me in connection with the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in London was Professor Joseph Godwin Greenfield, sometimes described as the father of neuropathology and in post at the time of Himmler's death. Had the brain been sent to him? A thorough search of his personal papers held at University College London Library did not turn up any references to Himmler whatsoever. Another avenue that might shed light on where the brain was sent was an examination of the private papers of Brigadier Hugh Glynn Hughes, the commander of the medical services for the British Second Army in May 1945, and the man who actually ordered Dr. Bond to conduct the post-mortem examination of Himmler. His papers reside at the Wellcome Institute in London. I made a thorough search of his extensive papers and found nothing concerning Himmler's brain. Strangely, I also found no mention of Himmler whatsoever, which, considering the high-profile nature of the prisoner and the controversy surrounding his death, appears odd. Glynn Hughes' papers certainly contain plenty of references to events before and after Himmler's death, but make no mention of anything concerning
This town
Himmler
is
himself.
empty. It's weird.
We can surmise from this that Glynn Hughes was being careful not to highlight his involvement, or he had been told to remain silent on the subject. So, another dead end regarding the quest for the missing brain. Casting my net more widely, I contacted the handful of brain banks that still exist in the UK in the hopes of a lead. More rejections, though some were friendly, others almost legal in their replies. For example, the Cambridge Brain Bank gave me the following very non-committal reply. Quote, "In compliance with the Human Tissue Act, post-mortem material held in our brain bank is anonymized for researcher inquiries and requests." End quote. In other words, if we have it, we won't tell you. If we don't have it, we won't tell you. The conclusion I must draw from my research is that Himmler's brain may still exist, but the likelihood of any institution admitting that they actually have it is remote, undoubtedly due to the negative publicity such an admission would generate, particularly in the press. It would also open a terrible can of worms concerning what to do with such an object. However, I'd like to ask anyone with information to come forward and contact me at hello@markfelton.co.uk, as I'm sure somebody knows something. Several people have already contacted me regarding the previous videos about Himmler's capture and death, providing fascinating information that is credible yet at odds with the official British story, indicating that the whiff of conspiracy still lingers over the death of the Reichsfuhrer SS. As for what became of Himmler's body, following the second post-mortem examination in 1946, the head was X-rayed by the authorities, apparently for purposes of identification, but these X-rays have never been made public. Himmler's corpse, far from what is reported in most history books, was not reinterred in his grave on Lüneburg Heath, but instead Corporal D.W. Williams, a mortuary assistant at Hanover Military Hospital, was ordered to take it to the hospital crematoria where it was incinerated. So if Himmler's brain can be found, DNA testing will at least settle one important question that has lingered over his death. Was the man who died in the front parlour of 31A Ulsenerstrasse Heinrich Himmler, or a double? The willful destruction of forensic evidence, while the corpse was in British hands, including the pulling out of the teeth prior to the first burial and the withholding of important identifying evidence from the pathologists, primarily Himmler's actual dental X-rays and several other points I've raised, have certainly contributed to the conspiracy that Himmler actually escaped justice in 1945. My personal view, based on everything I know about the case so far, is that the man who died in Lüneburg in May 1945 was Heinrich Himmler. But I'm not satisfied with the official story of his death, and I feel that the British authorities hid or suppressed the truth of what occurred in that room. Either Himmler died due to incompetence on the part of his captors, or due to malice, and realistically we will probably never know the truth. For when the records concerning Himmler's death are finally released in 23 years' time, perhaps, finally, the truth will out.
What'd you do with his brain? Oh, here's the trade broker. Let's see if anybody's buying anything.
The town of Berchtesgaden, which lies at the foot of the Obersalzberg mountain, contained Hitler's private home and other famous buildings like the Eagle's Nest, was captured on the afternoon of the 4th of May 1945 by troops of the 7th
Look, there's all kinds of
Regiment,
buy orders here
US
for all
3rd
kinds of stuff. What
Infantry
the hell?
Division, even though the area was not officially assigned to them. Everyone and his brother wanted to climb the steep road up to Hitler's private village, the Obersalzberg, and capture the badly damaged building complex, bombed by the British on the 27th of April and abandoned by the SS garrison as US forces entered Berchtesgaden down below. I've already made a video about the race for the Eagle's
Lodestone.
Nest,
You get a
which is
lot of
outside
money
the
for
remit of this program.
lodestone.
Link in the end screen. Berchtesgaden was very important, for it was the Nazi administrative capital for this picturesque region of Bavaria bordering
There was
Austria,
another 2 gold
and
from
contained many
Gherkins.
important Nazi buildings, including the mini Reich Chancellery
I
complex.
made money from all those
a collection
Gherkins
of
I
wooden
picked.
buildings
That's awesome.
containing ministries
2 gold,
evacuated
77.
from bomb Berlin that continue to control government functions
Spongewood
and military
sells for
command
pretty
throughout
good.
southern Germany. Shortly after capturing Berchtesgaden without a shot and clearing the town of German troops, a reconnaissance patrol moved down the road towards Schönau,
It's a thriving
small
market.
town on the north shore of the Königssee, a stunning alpine lake surrounded by craggy snow-capped mountains. As they moved into the town, the GIs again checked the buildings, among them a large alpine chalet being used as Luftwaffe headquarters for the region. At Berchtesgaden station, the Americans had captured several trains
Blackwood.
loaded with ark treasures. These were trains evacuated south by Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring a week earlier from his Karrenhall estate outside Berlin. Locals had looted many of the wagons, looking for food, drink, and other useful items. Unbeknown to
Valarium.
US troops edging into Schönau, more Göring loot, much of it gold, was hidden
Spongewood.
in a secret bunker in a cave near the town. This would eventually be found and recovered on the 25th of May 1945. One of the houses the US troops entered and cleared was a large alpine chalet with outbuildings, located at the end of a quiet road about 1 kilometer from Königssee, named the Schneewinkellehren. The owner had left in a hurry, leaving behind most of their belongings. A rudimentary search revealed that this was the house of Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, and after Hitler, the most wanted man in Germany. If you've watched the previous
Gherkins are
episodes
good.
in this series, you will know that on the 4th of May 1945, Himmler was nowhere near Bavaria. He was in fact in northern Germany, having established his final headquarters, and still hoping to play some useful role in Germany's final days in World War II. Opening wardrobes and cupboards, the GIs found Himmler's uniforms, photographs and other personal items, including a set of his medals. Naturally, a lot of this material would be pocketed by souvenir-hungry Americans over the coming days. The house was evidently a family home.
I don't
It
need
had a
that, really.
woman's touch, and women's clothing hung in closets. There were also 2 children's rooms for a
Wait.
boy and a girl. What the GIs had in fact captured was Himmler's love nest, the house he had purchased in 1943 for his mistress, one of his personal assistants named Hedwig Potthast. Potthast, who was a young secretary, had caught the Reichsführer's attention in the late 1930s. Himmler was unhappily married to his wife, Margarete, but doted on his daughter, Gudrun, and she discovered Himmler's relationship with Potthast in 1941. Himmler and his wife had separated, though never divorced. Himmler already owned a house at Gmünd, on the Tegernsee, south of Munich, that he had purchased in 1933 and had remodeled and enlarged in 1936. Himmler, though extremely powerful, never had a house on top of the Obersalzberg. Bormann did, and Göring did, and also Albert Speer further down the mountain. But Bormann, who was really an enemy of Himmler, managed to keep him at bay and away from the centre of power. When Himmler visited the Berghof, he, along with many other senior officials and generals, stayed at either the large Platterhof Hotel or a special VIP guest house at the Obersalzberg, or in one of several luxurious hotels down the mountain in
I'm at 3
Berchtesgaden.
gold already.
This was a rather
Almost 4.
unsatisfactory arrangement. With Himmler's separation from his wife in 1941, he no longer spent some months living at the house at Gmünd every year. The property, however, remained in Himmler's ownership, but only his wife and daughter lived in it, along with household staff and SS guards, accommodated in a special barracks building. There was also a bunker in the garden in case of air attack, constructed on Himmler's orders
This is
to
a
protect
beautiful
his
city.
family. and built by 20 special prisoners sent from Dachau concentration camp, one of whom died during the construction. In the meantime, Hedwig Potthast had given birth to an illegitimate child with Himmler, a son they named Helga in February 1942. Potthast's parents disapproved of their daughter's relationship with Himmler, but Himmler determined to provide a proper home for his mistress and his new son. Incredibly, Himmler, though master of a huge industrial empire based upon slave labor, didn't have much personal wealth, and it was noted that he was one of the few senior Nazis not to have had his hand in the till. He instead went cap in hand to Bormann for a loan from Nazi Party funds, and Bormann advanced Himmler 80,000 Reichsmarks in 1943. Himmler used the money to purchase Schneewinkellehren, a pretty alpine chalet sat on a large plot of land about a kilometre from Königssee. Ironically, this house had once been the holiday home of none other than the famous Jewish psychoanalyst Dr. Sigmund Freud. The funds were used to modernize the property and provide guard facilities and an air raid bunker, what Albert Speer...
Okay, guys, I think this is a natural place for me to stop. It's like 4 in the morning. Yeah, 4:30 in the morning, and I'm going to go to bed. Thank you so much for hanging around with me today. This is a good Rust into Mortal session. Doing a lot of sandboxes these days. Enjoying it. And I love you guys, and thank you so much for hanging out with me. Sang today for about 4 hours, and then I took like a 3-hour nap, and then I did like 8 hours of video games. So we're right now at about our 12-hour thing with a 3-hour break in between. I love singing for you guys, and I like being here with you guys, and thank you so much for paying attention to my channel. So just a reminder, I do record these sessions, and I've been recording this session. This session will be posted on my YouTube over the next day, and you can see everything that you saw here tomorrow. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Just click on the cat space to donate if you're watching me on YouTube, or you can sub to me on Twitch. I am an affiliate of Twitch, and you can sub to me there. Thank you so much for your time, guys. I appreciate it, and I love you guys, and that's all I have for you today. Take care. Love you. Bye.